Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 9 of the Titanforge podcast. My name is Dratnos. Joining me this week is Trell. Hello, Trell.
Hello. I don't have a camera, but I am.
Yeah, so this week, Trell, you are in a hotel on your way back home from Alaska or something?
Yeah, I had a pretty interesting week. I toured Alaska and Glacier Bay with some family. Had a nice getaway from everything, but I'm happy to get back. Getting kind of sick of traveling and having crappy weather.
Yeah, we're definitely glad to have you back. Tettles is not joining us this week. Tettles is, he's busy casting the race for World First over at twitch.tv/method. So that's a pretty exciting thing to be happening still. Race for World First will be something we'll be talking about on the show this week, as well as Beguiling. So that's what we'll be talking about: Beguiling, Dungeons, the state of Dungeons, and the M+ meta. Let's talk a little bit about the Eternal Palace. So the race so far, the state of the race so far. We've got Method, Limit, JTH, kind of the three frontrunners, fighting for World First on Ajara. Ajara, it's been now, 12 days since the raid opened, and she is still alive, which makes her the longest living boss since Kil'jaeden, I believe, in the last 3 expansions.
That's right. Yeah, I saw the chart the other day. I think 2 days ago. It was tied with was she 10 days?
Jaina was 10. Yeah, we're past the Jaina mark. We're past the Gul'dan mark now, which was I think 11. And Kil'jaeden was a 3 reset boss, which this boss is not necessarily going to be. We've still got a couple days left here in the second reset. And I think the boss is more likely than not going to die in the second reset. Maybe even today, maybe even the day that we're recording this show. Certainly, I think it's likely to be dead by the time this comes out on like audio feed. So if you're listening to this on iTunes, I expect Ajara is probably dead. It's really tough to tell who is the favorite to win the race for World First, though. Limit has the lowest % wipes right now, but they've had those in the past. They've been ahead in the past on Gahun. And Method ended up winning there. And I think JTH as well, Chinese Guild, is looking extremely strong this tier. They were having competitive wipes on Ajara with 1 less reset worth of gear because they reset on Thursdays. And so that's, a disadvantage that they looked like they were maybe able to overcome. So if the boss ends up dying in the next couple days, if it does go to 3 resets, it's going to be pretty much impossible for JTH to win this if it goes to a 3rd reset, I think. Because they're just going to be so far behind the gear from that 3rd reset against the other guilds with the 2 days.
Yeah.
Because I think if the boss dies in the 3rd reset, it'll be right at the start of the 3rd reset. So there'll be a pretty big advantage to the guilds that reset first. But yeah, so we're just nearing the end. As the time of recording this, we're nearing the end of Method's raid day and the start of Limit's raid day. So there's a possibility here that we'll have a kill maybe today. A kill today or tomorrow, I think is pretty likely. Although Ajara, so right now she's in the 20s for both Limit and Method. And we'll see if either of them can take it all the way down to 0 in 1 day or it takes them a couple. So
I think this race has been really cool to see. Not only is it televised from all the guilds doing really well in it, but there's one guild from each region. Each major region, at least, that usually does this. You can tell the best of the best go to one guild and kind of funnel outwards from there. It's cool to see.
Yeah. It's definitely nice, and this time we've seen this kind of this back and forth in World First between Method and Limit, where for the last 4 bosses they've alternated who got World First on each boss, which shows a really competitive race. I know we saw that in Uldir as well, where Method took over and took Zul first, but then Limit took Mithrax first. And that was when everybody was like, oh my goodness, wait, Limit is actually competitive here for World First. Because previously everybody kind of assumed that once Method overtook Limit, because Method starts 16 hours later, right? So the thought was as soon as they overtake Limit, they're going to win the rest of the way. But then now we start seeing this actually get shaken up a little bit. And then of course
there was they hit the first reset, right? And then Limit had to, they decided to keep trying attempts instead of reclearing.
Yeah, so Uldir, both guilds made it to reset before Gahun died, and Limit decided to extend their lockout and just spend a day. Since they reset 16 hours earlier, they were like, okay, we're going to get our Mythic Plus boxes, and we're gonna get our Vantis runes, and we're just gonna kill Gahoon before Method resets. But then they ended up not actually being able to kill it that day. Vantis runes had gotten nerfed a little bit since that I think, like, because at the start of the expansion, Vantis runes got nerfed by like 50%.
That's right. Yeah, they were super powerful.
They were really, really strong that first week, and so that would have, or the first like pre-nerf. So that still probably factored into their planning. But I mean, they ended up killing it that reset without much more gear. So it's unclear whether that was a bad strategy or not. I think it was a good strategy, and they just ended up not being able to execute it at the end. I think the extending the lockout made a lot of sense. Anyways, so that's been the story of World First this expansion. It's been a close battle. We haven't seen a North American World First since Shaw of Fear back in Mist of Pandaria, so that's been a long time. A long time since an end boss has gone down first for North America, and I think this time North America has a pretty good shot at it. Limit's about to start their pulls here today, and I think they're in good shape to, if not get a kill, at least get it into close kill range today. So we'll be watching that excitedly. And I don't know. I'm rooting for Limit. I'm rooting for North America, but
I'm rooting for Tettles.
You're rooting for Tettles? Okay, so does that mean you're rooting for Method?
Well,
he's casting the Method stream.
I'm rooting for Tettles.
Either way, I think there's like Method's decision to stream the entire race for World First live back when they first did that in, it was what, Dazarlor where they did that for the first time, or did they do it in Uldir? I think they did it in Dazarlor first. Either way, it was like that has revolutionized the race for World First, and there should just be nothing but praise for Method for choosing to just start streaming first. That was so great.
It has turned into a huge event, and it's really nice for the community to actually be able to see the progress. It's awesome. I'm so glad they did that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the Eternal Palace kind of as a Mythic dungeon, because I don't know, the texture of these past 4 raids has been pretty different. Difficulty-wise, I think there's some interesting things going on with Eternal Palace. So for context, like Dazarlor was a very flat difficulty curve, right? The first 8 bosses up until Jaina were all pretty easy, and they all died within about 50 wipes for the top guilds. And this time around, we've seen a much more curved difficulty curve, where starting at Ashvane, guilds were wiping substantial amounts of times. Then Orgazoa and Queen's Court were usually pretty quick after Ashvane, and then Zakul was another big step up in difficulty. And now Ajara looks like a really, really hard wall boss as well. So a lot harder than Dazarlor, kind of all around. What do you think about the difficulty curve of this dungeon, Drell?
I do think it's quite different than Dazarlor, as you said. The first boss being more difficult right off the bat is, especially for mid-range Mythic guilds, all the way down to people trying to plug it on their servers for a little bit of Mythic loot. I think that's a huge barrier for that, and for people like me that aren't rating this tier Mythic-wise, it's a little frustrating because you can't just hop in there and kill the first boss like you could last year.
Yeah, that was a feature of Champs and Talic, was that they were both really, really easy, and you could probably kill them in a bug. But now it actually, there are more bosses at 3 of 8 Mythic than there are at 1 of 8 Mythic by a substantial amount, and there were even on the first day, because the first 3 bosses are all, actually there's a strong argument that the first boss is harder than the next 2, which I think Tettles predicted this very accurately last time we had this show before Mythic came out. He correctly predicted that Ashvane was going to be a wall boss, which it absolutely is, and that Sivara would be maybe harder than the next 2 bosses, which it absolutely is. So really, really impressive predictions by Tettles on this very show. And yeah, I don't know what to think about the first boss being this hard. On the one hand, like, the good news is that, like, if you're trying to form like a semi-serious pug, you're not going to get locked out to the first boss and be unable to kill the next 2. Like, this was a thing that could happen in Dazarlor, is where, if you needed a piece of gear from Grong or Jadefire Masters, you would try and get in a pug to kill them, and you would just always kill champs, and then that didn't necessarily mean you could kill Grong or Jadefire.
Yeah, Grong was kind of the wall.
This time you can now, like, if you get in a pug, you are not going to get locked out unless you can kill all the first 3, because if you kill Savara, you can definitely kill the next 2. So I think that's kind of a good side about it.
It is. I think later on, when everyone has a little more gear on their mains and high levels a little bit higher, you could probably just bug the first boss a little easier and then just blast through the next two. That will be nice.
Yeah, and I don't mind if the first boss isn't puggable. Like I think it was by far the easiest way to get 415 gear last season was to kill Mythic champs. Like that was easier than doing a 10 and getting it out of your weekly box, probably.
True, it was a little too easy.
So I think that like having the gear be that easily available is not necessarily a good thing from a Mythic boss that's supposed to be like Savara feels like a real Mythic boss already in the first spot. So pretty cool. Okay, how about Ashvane? Do you think that it would make sense for there to be nerfs to Ashvane, given how many guilds are stuck on her, and how many guilds have been stuck on her for a while now?
I don't know if I really have an opinion either way on whether they should nerf her, but I think they will eventually. I'm not sure. They usually nerf the wall bosses within a couple weeks once, and then maybe again a few months later before the tier ends.
Yeah, although Ashvane, it's kind of a wall boss for reasons that like just farming neck level and like once people get neck level 65, it'll be nerfed. As people just get more gear each week, it gets nerfed because it's a DPS check, right? So that DPS check is getting nerfed as gear becomes more available too. So like it's unclear whether a nerf will even be necessary in a month's time. I do think you're right though. It's likely to be one of the bosses that does get nerfed because I think there is going to be a subset of guilds that like cleared 2 or 3 of 8 in the first week, 3 of 8 the second week, and will not kill Ashvane unless it's nerfed. Pretty much ever. So we'll have to see if they help those guilds out. Yeah.
I could see Ashvane's a cool and Ashara being nerfed again later down the line, just for the amount of guilds that will get cutting edge that they want to see. They usually do that for the mid-range Mythic guilds eventually.
Yeah, I guess you're right. There's usually just kind of a suite of nerfs to the raid. I hope that they give us a couple weeks though before they hit all the bosses again. I don't know the way my guilds usually works is we usually start progressing on the same version of the boss that was killed for world first, and then we end up killing it just after the first set of nerfs after that hits.
Yeah,
and I anticipate this will probably be a similar tier. Yeah. Cool how there's a schedule is what you're saying, yeah?
Yeah, nice schedule to it. There's like, you never know when it's going to happen, but
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of nerfs to Ajara is a boss that has seen multiple different sets of nerfs now before the world first has been claimed, which there's been some reactions to that from some people that seem as if they, like this is kind of an unprecedented thing. It's very much not. This happens to pretty much every raid boss, I think. Every end boss before it actually gets killed. In recent memory, they've taken nerfs, which I think it comes from Blizzard not wanting to release a easy end boss, so they kind of err on the side of being too hard as far for end bosses, and then they adjust downwards with balancing with hotfixes as needed, and that stops them from kind of getting in this situation where the end boss falls over in the first reset very easily. So let's talk about the nerfs that Ajara has sustained. Now, if you're not familiar with the Ajara boss fight, there's only about 50 different mechanics to it, so it's very easy to pick up. One of those mechanics is called Charged Spear, which is a effect that used to do arcane damage, and they nerfed it to do nature damage. And if you're wondering, well, how is that a nerf? There's a arcane vulnerability that everybody in the raid gets as long as you're in line of sight of Ajara, and it stacks up. And so changing that to nature damage has made it so that it doesn't interact with the arcane vulnerability. So that nerf has made the charged spear a lot less lethal. Also, that arcane vulnerability debuff, which stacked up whenever you're in range of Ajara, has been reduced to a 5-second duration instead of 7 seconds. So now you can line her for a smaller amount of time and drop that debuff, which is another, I think, just a small quality of life nerf. I don't think it makes the fight substantially easier. And then the big nerf that we've seen so far is the enrage timer on the ads. So the time you have to push the ad phase has been increased by 50%, so to 3 minutes from 2 minutes, which is a huge change that there has been some controversy about on social media and from the top guilds. I don't know if you've been watching the Race for World First and the Ajara fight. Do you have any opinions about these nerfs?
The only thing I was able to see from my cell phone reception list area was
Yeah.
the tweets back and forth. Eventually, while I was in the lodge for a meal, the tweets back and forth from limit to method, and kind of being nice to each other, and then all of a sudden at each other's throats, and then being nice to each other again. And I saw the one about 2 minutes to 3 minutes. How just
Yeah.
wait, one player was like, "Oh, we don't need 3 minutes."
The the lack of or the communication between limit and method on social media is always interesting because there's like they're rivals and there's definitely like sets of two people that like are at each other's throat between limit and method, and there's also sets of two people that are friends between limit and method. Uh, and it's fun to I don't know it's fun to watch. I think it makes it more entertaining as a spectator when there's like an actual legitimate rivalry where you know people are going to be happy if they win and sad if they lose.
Absolutely,
And like
and
and
everyone
somewhat
loves the drama.
antagonistic.
It's
Yeah,
always
I think a little bit of drama is not bad here. And I okay, there's been some like you know some stuff that I don't condone from both sides actually on Twitter, but it's still I think mostly positive. I think it's better to have teams that care a lot about who wins and are deeply invested in this, and you know are having even a real rivalry form than the other way around, where there's not really a difference between the two teams and everybody's just meh about it. Okay. One question about Ajar that has been coming up since obviously it's a mythic fight. We don't exactly know how it ends. Do you think there will be a secret mythic only phase at some point that we haven't seen yet in this fight?
I think both of us agree that there probably won't be a mythic phase at this point, and I thought there would have been before the tier started. But at this point now, I think the difficulty curve in these first few phases of Ashara is high enough to where I don't think they would have another. It's already like what, a 10-minute plus fight.
Yeah,
I don't.
we're already getting high on time here. If there is a mythic only phase, it's going to have to start at like 20%. Which you know they're like I don't think we're going to have one of these mythic only phases that starts at 0%. And you know makes the another 3 minute fight or 4 minute fight that happens afterwards, like we had in what was it, the Cho'Gall phase in Heimal, or the Illidan phase in Nighthold. Those mythic only
Yeah,
phases.
yeah. I
I would
was
be
imagining
surprised. Yeah.
an Illidan phase before the tier started, but now there's like no way in my mind I could see it. They already have like the N'Zoth cutscene at the end. You know, I couldn't imagine a second thing to pop in there and somehow end with the same.
Yeah, they would have to do like a mythic only cutscene, which I don't think they've done. Although mythic raiders have been asking for one for a long time, like a mythic only phase that has a different cutscene at the end. Um, so yeah, I think I agree though that there's unlikely to be a secret phase at the end of Ajara here. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. It's not impossible, but I think there's also an argument that it would have been data mined. I don't know how true that is. I don't know if Blizzard's able to sneak those things in without them getting caught by the data miners. We'll have to see next time they try how much gets seen about it beforehand. Okay, so that's the Eternal Palace. That's what's been going on there. We'll be watching with very rapt attention as this race wraps up. Next week, we will talk about how the race went. We'll have Tettles back, presumably, unless the bosses are still alive, unless Ajara is still alive in a week's time, in which case we will obviously have to do something different. But hopefully, next week, we'll be able to have all three of us back at our normal time, at our normal places, with our webcams, theoretically.
Please.
Theoretically. Yeah, I think one thing we've learned from doing this show is that it's actually very, very hard to have everybody around on a Saturday reliably. It's a time slot that is more booked than you would think. So
Yeah, honestly, even for myself, I've been gone like every weekend for the last 6 weeks. It's very frustrating. But soon
yeah,
I'll be
so
home.
hopefully, yeah, Tattles is going to fly back as soon as he wins or as soon as he finishes casting that thing. So
I
that'll
hope
be
he
the plan
wins.
there.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
I hope he wins the casting as well. Okay, let's move on to our second topic of the day, which is the developing Mythic Plus metagame and the state of Beguiling now that we've gotten to play with it for even longer. So first off, Beguiling has received a couple of changes this week. This week's affixes. Okay, actually, let's start with this week's affixes because they're a bit of a curveball. This week is Fortified, Grievous, Sanguine, Beguiling, and if you have not been here, 2 weeks ago it was Fortified, Grievous, Beguiling, and one of the other ones, Bolstering, I think, or something. It was
Well,
Bolstering. Yeah. So three out of the 4 affixes active this week were active 2 weeks ago, which is very strange. That's not the kind of thing you expect to see in the affix schedule. To have like 2 back-to-back fortified Grievous weeks. But here we are. Do you have any opinion about this being on the schedule, the calendar?
The FX rotation is kind of like up in the air for me still, because we've only seen 3 weeks of it, I think, and we still have 9 weeks to go, presumably, if they kept the 12-week. So right now, I'm like, I don't know. Before there was a necrotic, skittish, necrotic combo back to back to back for tanks.
Right.
Those 3 weeks were kind of hard for anyone playing tank, especially for newer tank. But I mean, Grievous weeks 2 weeks apart isn't that bad in my opinion, as long as everything else is kind of.
Yeah, it did go. It went Grievous, Tyrannical Grievous. So there are some imagine being a healer in like Waycrest Manor. Like Heartsbane Triad has been hard for 3 weeks now, very hard to heal. So there's.
That's true. Yeah.
I think there. I think it would be better if they tried to avoid having 3 of the 4 affixes be the same, within 2 weeks of each other. But
I can agree with that.
Either way,
I'm happy though that Beguiling is now ready to go live.
Yeah.
They fixed a couple issues with the affix that probably should have been taken care of on PTR, but we're happy to see it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, issues that were reported on the PTR, I believe. One issue was that emissaries did not give count in Toldagor or Siege of Borealis, which has been fixed now this week, week 3. So that's good, I guess. I'm glad it happened. It's definitely something that could have persisted the whole season, I guess. So I'm glad it didn't.
Yeah, it could have for sure.
The Void Emissaries are no longer distractible, which is a huge thing. Part of our strategy for Void Emissaries in a lot of spots was to just shroud past them with distract, and that is no longer possible now. So that's a pretty big buff to Void Emissaries. They're going to have to be melded or killed or skipped with some kind of death skip.
Yeah, I think that was a good change. The distract thing was a pretty high skill cap way to skip the pack. Like, not only did you have to distract it, everyone had to be mounted, ready to go, and like really tight together because you only have a short window from when the mob first lets you go past, and then it will turn around and notice you a few seconds later.
Yeah, the distract phase was pretty short, and the rogue had to be on it. They had to distract, particularly I remember the skip we had in Ataldazar past the 2 Void Emissaries, where it's a 2 rogue execution thing. You only use 1 shroud, and you have to there's basically 1 second of wiggle room in the whole 15 seconds of shroud to play with, and yeah, I mean it was awesome.
Yeah.
It was awesome. It was fun to execute, but I don't envy people trying to do that in pugs, right, or in less coordinated groups. Mm-hmm.
There's no way.
And I mean, I still don't know how pugs are supposed to deal with Void Emissary, Honor Guard, Witch Doctor, or anything, but I think it's just going to be a death skip. I think that's how you're supposed to deal with that part.
You'd have to do the pull in 3 parts. You'd have to not kill the totems, kill off the 2 non-honor guards first while the tank gets a bunch of bleeds or kites them off and whatever. Mm-hmm. Then you have to kill the honor guards, go back up, kill the totems, then go back out of LOS of the Void Emissary and kill the honor guards. And then finally go up and kill the Void Emissary.
We're starting to get to the range where you could probably lust this pull twice. Okay, so that's the stupid Void Emissaries. They've been buffed. That's rough. We do have another interaction that has been changed, which is Beguiling and Sanguine have no longer gotten interaction, which is nice. Beguiling, so at the start of this week, which was a Sanguine week, you'd have this situation where a Sanguine pool would drop underneath a Void Emissary, and then the Void Emissary would be unkillable until that Sanguine pool disappeared, which is pretty toxic. So they've removed that interaction, which I think is good. I think it's very good. I was a little worried that we were So one of the things that I think made Infested bad and made Reaping good was that Infested did interact with pretty much every affix, and Reaping did not, and I think that was a good thing with Reaping. And I'm glad that they've made this fix, because I was worried that we were going to kind of go back to Infested with interaction with these other affixes.
I was worried too, and I'm glad they are aware of that and they actively fix it. I think they intended for all the emissaries to be unaffected by affixes, but that one may have slipped. So they fixed it quickly, which is good on that one.
Yeah. So if anybody does want to check out one thing that we've done as a podcast is we've written an article here on Wowhead about the state of Mythic Plus in Season 3. This contains it contains a little bit of information that's no longer accurate. It contains some strategy, like the Void Emissary strategy with the distract here, no longer works. So this article includes like strategies for dealing with each of the emissaries. Ignore this here, option 3 for Void Emissaries. But if you're interested, we'll have a link to this in the description of the show and the show notes. Depending on wherever you're finding this, there should be a link to this article. So you can check it out. It's pretty cool. The three of us wrote it together, put it up on Wowhead, and we're really excited to have that there. Big thanks to Wowhead for letting us write an article for them. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was good. We each included a bunch of our opinions on this topic.
We kind of ran you can see that we've got this format here where we each put our thoughts and opinions, and we have a little section about using the pre-made group finder. Yeah, it's really cool. So check that article out. Let us know what you think of it. We'll try and do more stuff like this in the future. It was awesome. One other thing we have this week is a buff coming in to Tank Threat, which, as a tank that plays something other than a warrior, this is extremely relevant to you, Trell.
Yes.
Brewmaster Threat among every tank threat has been increased, and the way they're phasing this in is you're getting a threat increase at neck level 35, at neck level 55, neck level 35, 55, and 65 are threat increases. So each time you unlock an essence slot, you are getting a threat increase as well, which is designed to compensate the extra threat being made by DPS getting essences at those levels as well. So how does that...
I think it's a good start. I'm glad they're aware that there's a problem. And I'm happy that this is happening, and tanks need more threat. Even Prot Warrior is struggling on threat outside of Avatar, which is kind of insane at this point with the game. But each tank needs more threat so they can be more competitive with each other. And if they just give an additional base threat buff across the board, I think it might make a big difference. Although I haven't hit 65, so I'm not sure how it's going to look.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'll help, but I still think you're right that there should be some more help for tanks. I think there's a lot of situations where tanks like go into a pull, hit a damage button every single global, and try to get threat and are doing everything they can and still don't get threat, and that's just disastrous for the state of the game. I think it's okay if tanks lose threat pretty quickly when they're kiting or whatever. Like, I think that's an okay nerf to kiting. So I think so, yeah. I think they should maybe think about going in here and making it so that like threat decays. Like, just rework a little bit. Give tanks a huge buff to how much threat they generate when they're in melee with stuff, and then make it decay when they're not in melee with stuff, and when they're not attacking stuff. Like, I think that would be a good way to handle this. But I don't think that a tank should be able to like attack a target using a damaging global every second and not have threat. I think that's really problematic. Well. Yeah.
I think if you're playing optimally, you should not lose threat. That should not be a thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the metagame. And by the metagame here, I mean which classes and specs we think will see some representation, which classes and specs we think are doing well in keys this season or are likely to do well this season. So obviously we're coming off of Season 2, where Prot Warrior was the best tank by quite a bit, by a long shot. Resto Druid was the best healer by a long shot. Outlaw Rogue was like the best DPS by quite a long shot, along with like, Windwalker type stuff. Like one Windwalker, 2 Outlaw was huge. So that was last season. This season, let's start off with tanks. What kind of tanks do you expect to see this season, Trell?
It's kind of hard to tell. I think we're gonna get a lot of Prot Warrior again eventually, especially for MD. But for now, I think Prot Warrior, Prot Paladin, Brewmaster, and Guardian are all very good tanks. Prot Warrior may be a little bit on top, and it is the beginning of a new season, so everyone's kind of playing their home base. Mm-hmm. They want to play what they like to play more than the flavor of the month tank.
Right. Like so you're back on your monk. A lot of people are back on their monk. What do you like about Guardian? What is it that excites you about Guardian?
Guardian actually does a lot of damage. It struggles for the first few seconds of a pull, but then after that, it's very tanky and does quite a bit of consistent, for maybe even more than Prot Warrior in some situations.
Okay. Yeah, so here I have a chart of representation in keys 15 and up so far this season. We have Prot Warrior sitting in first place still at 32%, which is not actually that high for a first place tank.
Yeah,
there have
it's
been
not nearly as bad as
not as bad as Prot Warrior last season, Death Knight the season before, Death Knight for most of Legion. So Prot Warrior in first place, but not by an overwhelming amount. In second place, we actually have Protection Paladin right now, which is a spec that I've started playing Protection Paladin this week. I think that it's a spec that gained a tremendous amount from essences. Protection Paladin was a spec that had a problem where you didn't have enough uptime of your Shield of the Righteous, which is like you take very little damage when your Shield of the Righteous is up, but you had this problem where you couldn't have it up for more than like half the time. And the Memory of Lucid Dreams essence refunds Shield of the Righteous charges, which I think can get your uptime pretty much all the way up there towards where you're not in trouble anymore. And I think that we're starting to see this reflected as there are starting to be quite a lot of paladins timing high keys now, timing keys 15 and up.
Yeah, and one thing about Paladin is I already knew they were strong, but I didn't realize that Memory of Lucid Dreams refunds Shield of the Righteous charges until right before we talked on, and that to me makes them pretty competitive for a top spot. However, their big downfall for stuff like MDI is that they can't be Night Elf.
Yep, it's tough to imagine compositions without Night Elf succeeding at the MDI. This is something that we'll talk about more. We'll talk about this in the Q&A section actually, because we've already got a question lined up that will lead us into this discussion. But it's definitely a huge drawback to the Paladin class in both the tank and the healer role is the lack of being able to play Night Elf and the damage role actually. So all three Paladin roles really being held back at MDI levels by the races they can play. Interestingly enough, okay. Then we got Brewmaster in third place, 17.6% of keys 15 and higher. Timed this season. Pretty exciting place for Brewmaster to be, especially because there were so few last season. Yeah, it's definitely a good time for Brewmaster. I think Ring of Peace is looking better this season than it has in a long time. I mean, Ring of Peace has always been good, but this season against Beguiling, there's just so much good ways to use it against pretty much everything. So an awesome tank for that. Then we have the two self-healing tanks. So that's Death Knight and Vengeance. Death Knight at 12.4%, Vengeance at 10%. These are two specs that I'm still very worried about. Just at kind of as keys level higher, self-healing tanks, unless they're really, really strongly tuned, like Death Knight used to be, it's difficult to imagine them scaling as the damage they're taking scales like at the same speed. So I think they're going to start becoming squishier and squishier at the higher keys.
Yeah, Vengeance definitely got a little bit better from last season. I've played it a couple times just for all keys so far to do my weekly stuff, but it's not quite up to where it needs to be still. And I think Death Knight is still largely the worst tank in Mythic Plus somehow. As weird as that is to say coming from Legion, but those two tanks need a little bit of workaround to make them competitive in each tier.
We have a comment here from Jason XD Rothel in chat, who is a trusted source on Brewmaster tanking as well. MDI competitor, who says, I think some of these stats are skewed. Brew is represented because raid tanks are Brewmasters and they're getting high keys done for Essence and Residuum. I think they'll fall off as we go through the season. That's definitely an effect that, this isn't necessarily like representative of what the best specs are, like in M+, because you're right, there's absolutely people doing keys for non-M+ reasons. So you're right, that might be an effect that is increasing Brewmaster representation. And similarly, that might be an effect that's leading to reduced Guardian Druid representation, right? Guardian Druid is not a tank that we see in raid all that often. Although one of the guilds on our server actually uses one and has used one forever and has succeeded with it. But 8% Guardian Druid representation here in the 15s and higher. That number might be underselling how good they are for the same reasons that Jason thinks Brewmaster is being overrepresented here.
I agree. There's always everyone plays most tanks at the beginning of a season, and then it kind of falls into a meta eventually in the later part. And also, while we're on the topic, when we talk about how strong or weak a tank is, sorry, there's like a plane flying by my hotel.
You're good. I can't hear it.
Oh, that's good. So when we talk about the strength of a tank, we're talking about a very wide range of qualities, like how well they survive, how much damage they do, how much utility they bring, how well they keep threat, how well they can escape and help their party members with dispels and battle reses and all kinds of different things. There's just so much to talk about when we say good, in
Mhm.
just one word with a tank. And
Yeah,
so when we say like DKs or vengeance demon hunters are bad, what I'm saying there is that they just can't live very well. That's the biggest point in Mythic play.
yeah. So we're not making an argument that their utility is bad. Like Death Knight's utility is unchanged since they were the dominant tank, right? With grip and with Gorfine's mass grip. So those 2 points of utility are huge. It's more just that we feel these tanks are likely to require more healing, and require particularly with Death Knight and Vengeance. They kind of get in these spots where they're going to die from full health to 0 in like 2 globals, and there's not a good way to avoid that happening. Like Death Knight, when they first pull a pack right now, are so squishy at the start of pulls, and Vengeance is getting better. Like there are ways with essences to give them more mitigation uptime, but they still have this problem where they need demon spikes to be up in order to survive a melee attack from a mob, and demon spikes is just not up all the time. So those are the reasons that we are low on Blood Death Knight and Vantage Demon Hunter. Now that being said, this is for like what we expect to see in key pushing and like competitive, highly competitive, high keys. If you are playing either of those specs, you can absolutely do well with those specs and do keys with them. And we're mostly talking about like what we expect to see in the top few keys timed at the end of the season. So this is
Yeah,
not something
absolutely.
that you should use to choose what you're going to play, unless you are going to try and do the top few keys of the season. In which case, you probably know more than us anyway, and you should have your own opinion and do it based on that. Do your own. You probably know more than us and have done your own testing if you are competing for, like, if you're somebody who needs to make a decision based on that kind of information. You have better information than us anyway. So that's the tank representation. Let's move on to talking about healers. Healers, we see a much more stacked, a much less representation of the different specs
Oh,
here
boy.
than we do with tanks. We've still got Restoration Druid coming in over 50% of the keys done 15 or higher, so way more represented than Prot Warrior is Resto Druid. And then we've got Holy Paladin coming in second with 15%. Mistweaver Monk coming in third, 11%. The Priest specs at 8.7 and 4.7, that's Disc and Holy respectively, and Resto Shaman at 4.8% of keys 15 and higher. So extremely lopsided metagame here for healers and high keys still. Do you see any glimmer of light, so to speak, for another tank spec or another healer spec this
I don't
season?
know. You would think that it would be a little bit more like tanks are right now, where it's a more even spread at the beginning of the season. But man, there's still so many druid only players that are doing 15 and up at the moment, even the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, so part of it
Uh,
I think is that the like Mythic Plus healers are more Resto Druid. Like they're like, I think part of this is just still that all of the top healers are probably just still playing their druids from last season. They're probably like, there are people that their favorite healing spec is something other than Resto Druid, but they have been playing Resto Druid for so long now in keys that they are just still doing that in keys this season. Unlike tanks, who, if they were playing Prot Warrior last season, it's still only been 1 season since they started playing Prot Warrior, and so they were still wanting to go back to their favorite spec when the
yeah,
changes
that's
came out. Whereas
Resto
Resto Druid
Druid
has been the healer since forever in M
for like
plus.
2 years. Yeah,
Yeah, with that, there was that brief blip of time when Holy Paladin was the play at the end of Legion, but other than that, it's been all Resto Druid all the way down. So I think we're like, this isn't necessarily an effect that says this season Resto Druids are particularly strong. I think it's more that like there's no evidence that Resto Druid has gotten any worse, and everybody has been playing Resto Druid for so long now that they're just kind of entrenched on that. Everybody's used to playing with Resto Druids, and it's causing this effect here.
yeah. I don't think the other healers are that bad though. This is kind of skewed based on pop. I think
Mhm.
Mistweaver, Holy Paladin, and Resto Shaman are all healers that I've played with, and they can be very good, close to Druid level. I think Druid still has the better utility kit. Of course, they just have everything, you know. But
the battle res being like having a battle res on a healer at range instant cast is a dramatic effect that Resto Druid has. That I think if Blizzard were looking at ways to make this chart less lopsided, a good answer that would not affect raid balance would be to just give battle reses to these other specs. Just make it a healer thing to have an instant battle res. And then you can give like the DPS specs that currently have it. They can keep theirs as well. But yeah, Beguiling is okay. So we have some things in chat about Beguiling being a Resto Druid affix. Trell, do you think Beguiling is a particularly good affix for Resto Druid? I guess Resto Druids have a pretty easy time knocking away enchanted emissaries with Moonfire and Sunfire and stuff. They have the chain roots for the emissaries of the tides, and I guess they deal with void emissaries. They're probably not the best at dealing with void emissaries compared to some of the other specs, but you can just line those, right? So that's less of a thing.
Just thinking about a Resto Druid's kit right off the bat, you have 3 ways to deal with an enchanted emissary. You can Vortex it back, you can Typhoon it away, you can spam several abilities on every GCD to knock, whereas other healers probably don't have something like that.
Oh yeah, you can taunt you can taunt it and that knocks it back too.
Yeah, you can a 4th way, you can taunt, you can bear taunt it. They also have stealth to just slip past it, res people across it. They can stealth on all 3 emissaries if they're in certain spots. And on tides, they can mass root. They can continually single root it for 8 seconds over and over. No other healer has something.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Mistweaver does bring the Ring of Peace, which is a lot of utility against Beguiling as well. But I think you're right. Yeah, Beguiling being a Resto Druid affix is a good call. That's by Nerf Tank TV, MDI champion in chat. So good call out from him there.
Good friend Nerf Tank TV.
Good friend Nerf Tank TV. So yeah, definitely looks like another season where, barring some kind of intervention, we expect to mostly see Resto Druids in the high keys and the MDI level, which I think is something that Blizzard should change. I think it would be better if it was not that way. So
yeah, maybe don't put the only Virez and the only Soothe on one class and stealth. It just seems like a little much.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tough. They always talk about how it's hard to nerf Resto Druid without nerfing them too heavily in raid. But I think they need to come up with a creative solution to this, because I think this is a problem. And I think it's a problem actually for the optics of the game as well. I think the game, like when everybody tunes into the MDI and sees I think people would have a better opinion of the game if more classes showed up in the MDI. And I think that like when you tune in and Twitch chat is just always talking about the class balance thing, like the class balance doesn't actually make the MDI less competitive. The MDI is extremely competitive. There's a tremendous amount of skill to it, but the entire conversation in Twitch chat is hijacked by this class diversity issue. So I think that makes it a problem, even though it's not necessarily a problem in and of itself. But I think it is an optics problem that Blizzard has, and it's unclear whether they're aware they have it, because they haven't seemed to change to do anything about it in the healer role. So I think that one in particular, like I think what they've done this season with tanks is good. I think that tanks this season look like there's enough shakeup with tanks, and like reasonable people can be like, I think this spec might be good this season, and try it. But I don't think that you could do the same with healers in the same way. So
yeah, I'm on the same page with that.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk a little bit about DPS. DPS last season, we saw a very melee meta. This season, there are some ranged popping up in some keys. So the DPS graph is obviously a little bit harder to read at a glance than the tank and healer ones. But the DPS graph, we still got rogues and demon hunters doing a lot of the live keys. Demon hunters have always been much more represented on live keys than they have been in the MDI. They bring a ton of utility. But they aren't always like huge pumpers overall damage-wise. This season, though, they do quite a bit of overall damage as compared to last season relative to some of the other specs. Rogues, we've got both Outlaw and Assassination. Assassination seeing representation at a little bit below half the level of Outlaw, which is way higher than last season. Yeah.
7 subtlety runs.
7 subtlety runs, yeah. I'm going to work on getting that number up personally. I'll be playing higher... or I'll get that number up for subtlety this season for sure.
I think 3 out of 7 of those runs were my friend Morningwind sneaking sub as his spec into the key under my nose.
Yeah, that's how
tested.
that's the strategy that us rogues. If you are a rogue who loves subtlety, the only way to play it in keys is you have to swap to it without your group noticing when they start the key, and hope that they don't kick you before the key finishes, which does happen. We have some range specs actually seeing some love here. So among the melee, we don't see much movement here. Fury is on the come up. That's something worth noting. Fury is starting to see some representation here, and there's been some high profile Fury Warriors just smashing damage meters. So I would actually not be surprised to see a Fury Warrior at MDI in a lot of comps, just based on how much damage they do right now. That is absolutely something worth calling out. When you play a Fury Warrior, you are like that slot. You're sacrificing a lot of utility in, as compared to like an Outlaw Rogue, but you might be getting an extra 5 or 10% damage, which is worth.
It caught my eye because I've seen groups with a Fury Warrior doing like 15 to 20% more damage than other players in the group. Mm-hmm. It certainly has potential. Maybe not in the niche of MDI, but we'll see. Everyone's going to test it out, I'm sure.
And they Fury also pumps single target, which is like, even if their overall is say competitive with Outlaw overall, it's more priority damagey than Outlaw's damage profile is, which is an upside of theirs as well. Then we have ranged. Ranged last season we saw a pretty low amount of representation of. Balanced Druids, though, are on the come up again. They've recovered and are the top represented spec in M+, with Hunters just behind them. I think Balanced Druid has always, though, been represented more highly in live keys than it has been like in the very highest of keys.
Yeah. For raid, I think, again, this is the beginning of a raid tier and people are doing 15s. I think a lot of Balanced Druids are in there. However, I also think Balanced Druid is going to be really good this season. People just haven't had a chance to do it in high keys yet.
Mm-hmm. Balanced Druid brings the same kit or a lot of the same kit that healers, the rest of Druids have for Beguiling. So that's good. And then also Mage. If you actually add together Fire and Frost, Mage is more represented than any of this other stuff. Again, part of that might be just that people are gearing their Mages for Raid because Mages are insane in Raid this tier. But both Fire and Frost seeing a ton of representation in keys this season. Arcane, not as much. Arcane, there have been 4 Arcane Mage runs, so that's less than Subtlety Rogues. So,
that's funny.
Yeah, but both Fire and Frost look very, very strong for like utility and or damage, depending on which of the 2 specs you're looking at there. And then we still have Elemental Shaman, Shadow Priest, pretty much everything except Warlock. Actually, there's a strong argument for it being good in keys, and then Warlock. Warlock, we have Demo in the first place, but the problem with Demo is you don't have an interrupt when you're playing Demo. And then we have Affliction and Destro trailing behind with very, very small representation numbers, which are specs that just have a lot of problems in M+, based on how their cooldowns line up and how their damage ramps up. So I think Warlock's still unlikely to see all that much play this season. Maybe one Demo. The problem is, like, when you have a Demo Warlock in your group, it's kind of the same thing as having a Fury Warrior in your group. You're kind of sacrificing utility for damage in a slot. But I don't think Demo is bringing the kind of absurd damage that Fury is to justify getting that spot.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Warlocks are pretty useful right before the key. They can give you health stones, and then you can kick them from the group. And then
that's true, yeah. A lot of groups do have a Warlock very briefly before they start the key. Yeah.
In reality, they aren't that bad, but their utility is lacking. It's true.
Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of really cool like Warlock gateway skips. I don't know if you remember, there was the gateway skip into Volkal's room that then got fixed. So they're like Warlock utility has been taken away in the form of fixing a lot of really cool gateway skips.
Yeah.
So that's something that if they wanted Warlocks to be more represented, just bring back just let us gateway through line of sight and it'll be good again, and we'll just use it as for skips. That'd be cool. Okay, so that's the M+ metagame. A couple specs we didn't mention: Rep Paladin, that kind of stuff. Windwalker Monk still looking good. Windwalker Monk still looking strong for MDI, I think in particular. You're still somewhat likely to see a Windwalker in a lot of groups, but it's seeing less representation in live keys. I think again partially because it's not a spec that sees representation in raid, so people aren't really gearing it right now.
Yeah, I think it'll be in MDI comps especially. It just pairs so well with Prot Warrior. It gives Prot Warrior all the tools that it lacks, and the 5% physical damage debuff.
Okay.
And say if it's another tank that might not need a Windwalker. You might want a Demon Hunter instead.
Some composition that included a Demon Hunter, like an Assassination Rogue. Those are kind of specs that would work well together as well. Assassination, Demon Hunter. We could go back to season 1 meta was like Tank Healer, Assassination, Havoc, and Balance Druid. That was a season 1 meta comp, or Mage in that Balance Druid spot. Those kind of things. So
yeah,
we could see stuff like that again, maybe. Mage, yeah.
I like that.
Mage is definitely very cool. Fire is pumping. Frost can kind of do a good subtlety rogue impression with Packed Ice builds and Frozen Orb builds, so they can do good priority damage. And that's a useful thing, especially if you're going to actually kill Void Emissaries. But one problem with Void Emissaries is that the best strategy for them in the MDI is likely going to be to Shadow Meld past them. So let's talk a little bit about this, and let's do this with, we've got a question here, so let's drifting into our Q&A segment. From Undad TV, who says, hope the lads talk about lack of NG res in MDI again, which I think is a good way to segue into this discussion. Engineering res. So if you're wondering what does engineering res have to do with Shadow Meld, let me tell you the story. All right, engineering res is an item that, if it were allowed, would make specs such as Holy Paladin be ones that you could consider playing in the MDI. But one problem with Holy Paladin is that it cannot play Night Elf, and Night Elf is the race that has Shadow Meld. So that's how Engineering Res and Shadow Meld are linked as issues go. I think that Engineering Res in MDI is something that they should add, but I actually would be surprised if it changed what the top teams were running. I think that if you add Engineering Res to the MDI, you will see some people, like there are some specific people I'm thinking of that would play pet specs that are not in the metagame right now. Like there's one particular, I don't know if you know Ellesmere, huge Holy Paladin on live keys. Yeah, that I think would play Holy Paladin in the MDI if there were engineering reses. So I think that's, I mean, I don't know, he might even do it without it. I don't know, but all I know is I've done keys with him, and I'm a firm believer in his Holy Paladin. But I would still be surprised if any of the any of the method teams or whatever were to bring Holy Paladin, just because of the Night Elf issue. Shadow Meld being so strong for these roots. And by roots here, I mean, I spell them the other way, not ROOTS, but ROUTS.
It's possible in certain dungeons that you wouldn't have to Night Elf skip a bunch of things. But like, there are several instances where Shrine of the Storm, for example, you would Night Elf skip every single Reaping Wave. So 5 Night Elf skips in the dungeon, or 4 rather, and then you skip the last wave at the last boss. But you have such big skips in Night Elf, there's no possible way you could bring a Paladin because they couldn't be the class.
Yeah, but that was Reaping, right? Now that's not a thing anymore. Like, now you could make an argument for not needing Night Elf in every dungeon. I don't know. I think my theory with engineering res is like, I don't think it would bring much more diversity in here, but it certainly wouldn't hurt, and it would let teams at least try to play stuff other than Resto Druid. And it would, like, there are maybe 5 different reasons that Resto Druid is the only healer we see in the MDI, and you may, like, if somebody comes to you and is like, hey, you should take away one of these barriers to other specs seeing representation, I don't think the answer is, well, there are these other 4 barriers, so we shouldn't even try. I think the answer should be, all right, let's do it, and we'll work on the other barriers later.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think
true. I don't think it would change much, but it would improve quality of life for sure.
Yeah, Tettles was talking with me about this because, of course, Tettles, casts MDI. He's in the MDI Discord, and there's been some discussion there about adding the engineering res. And he's also in our podcast. So we were talking about it in our podcast Discord. And his theory is that it wouldn't change anything, but that they should do it as well. So that I think I come down pretty much on, I think if you add the engineering res, all that will happen is, like, maybe you'll see a couple of Mistweaver teams in some spots, but the main thing that'll happen is that, like, people that have a specific pet class that is not Resto Druid will be able to actually play that and try and top 8 a cup, and you might see it on TV, which would be really good. I think it'd be awesome. Okay, we got one suggestion here from Bergie101 in chat that is actually pretty cool. MDI should have no class race limitations, which would just mean that everybody could be a Night Elf. That's an interesting way of handling it. I think that is coming at the problem from the wrong angle. I think the problem is not that not everybody can be Night Elves. I think the problem is that Night Elf is so OP. I think that the solution is just Shadow Meld should get nerfed dramatically.
Yeah, I could see that. And Blizzard's approach, realistically, is always to nerf one thing rather than change an entire system around or buff 9 other specs. So they would definitely choose to nerf Shadow Meld if anything.
Yeah, so just hit Shadow Meld with the old 30-minute cooldown. That would be fair. Just turn it into a 30-minute CD, or remove it, change it into something else, make it not work in M+. I don't know, but whatever it is, Shadow Meld is so game changing right now that I think they need to hit that. Okay.
Agreed.
Got another question here from Sparklife1. Do they make, so this is going back to Ajara. Do they make it this difficult just for the world first? I doubt it. Do you think that they make Mythic end bosses this difficult just for the purposes of world first?
I think they tune them high. I think they tune them higher than they think they should be initially, so that they make sure the boss doesn't die within 2 days of it being out. What was the fastest boss kill? Was it good?
It was Xavius in Emerald Nightmare, yeah, which died on third day. Yeah,
2 days, 2 or 3 days, and it was so fast. And I don't think they like that. They want their content they worked hard on to last at least a week. It seems like.
Yeah, I don't think it's specifically for the world first raiders, but I think it's for the world 1 through 25 guilds. They want to have a real difficult challenge at that last boss, and I think again it's also an optics thing where they want even though there's only 20 people that get world first, there's still hundreds of people that watch the world first race, and now that it's being broadcast on Twitch, there's hundreds of thousands of people that interact with the world first race and watch it on Twitch. So I think that they tune it high for that reason as well, and I think they really do want to avoid Exorcist. I think Jason XD Raffle in chat is correct that Exorcist killed it before they went to sleep after the first lockout of Emerald Nightmare. They killed Xavius,
yeah.
So
that was... Blizzard definitely wants to avoid that. Nothing like making a challenging puzzle for millions or hundreds of thousands of players and then watching it just get beaten in 1 day.
Right. So they I think that's their answer is they start with the version that first comes out of a mythic end boss is almost always going to need to be nerfed or going to get nerfed before it ends up getting killed. I think Ajara was killable probably without these nerfs, but it would have taken quite a while and been very, very hard. And I don't think they actually want... I don't think they want it to go much longer than now. I think that somewhere in the 10 to 15 day range is where they're aiming these bosses at. Maybe the 7 to 15 day range of how long the end boss lives. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions you picked up from chat? Anything else you'd like to discuss here? Oh, we got one here from the Shift Mage.
Yeah, I was looking at that. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of missing items, which has been a discussion in chat, what are your thoughts on the potentially intentional lack of World Quest Azerite and Mechagon loot, aka stuff that isn't reasonably available at 445? So we're talking about MDI here, items that aren't on the vendors. So Mechagon items not being on the vendors is a pretty big nerf to Fire Mage in particular for MDI.
They have bracers, right?
Really important. They have bracers that are almost as important as the bracers were for them in Legion, and those bracers were legendary. But yeah, there's some very, very strong bracers for Fire out of Mechagon that they can't get in MDI. World Quest Azerite is another thing that last MDI you could get access to World Quest Azerite that scaled all the way up to the same level as any other Azerite on the tournament realm, and that's going away. That's not going to be available this time. I don't have a huge... Okay, I kind of wish the way they addressed this was that you could get Mechagon loot, but it would be at Mechagon eye level. So you could get Mythic Raid loot at Mythic Raid eye level, or you could take the Mechagon bracers at Mechagon eye level. And if that was an upgrade for you, then that was what you could wear. Because right now the way they do it on the tournament server is that everything gets scaled to a certain loot level when you get into those keys, so what they've done this season is in order to make it more resemble what live looks like, they only want loot that drops at that eye level on the vendor. But that makes it not look like live because now nobody has Mechagon loot that they do have on live. So that's, Yeah,
I think it should be on MDI Tournament Realms for sure. It would more sense to me, at least. You never know, they could add it in the next week. I think next weekend we'll have a lot to talk about with the MDI comps and the first-time trials that'll be happening at the time of the next podcast. So there should be a lot of content to discuss there and maybe some meta shifts that we see everyone figuring out possibly Superior Warrior, all that. But Fire Mage, maybe not without those bracers.
Yeah, I think the Fire Mage. I don't know. I think they should add the bracers and they should add the engineering res. And then I also think that they should do some healer balancing. I think that those would be the three things that I would choose them to do. Not in that order. I think the most important thing is some healer balancing in M+. Okay. Any other questions we got here from chat? Also, one thing. Let me just say this now. If you're listening to this show post-recorded and you're like, hey, I'd like to participate in this Q&A section, but I am not listening to this live, so I can't. We are going to fix that going forward. What we're going to do is we're going to tweet what our show topic will be. We'll try and tweet it on Thursdays, and we record on Saturdays. So follow us at Titanforge WoW, and you can ask us questions in a reply to that tweet, and we'll answer that on the show. So if you don't listen live, but you'd still like to have your questions answered on the show, that's going to be something that you can do going forward. So check it out on Twitter. We'll do that there. All right. Any questions you've identified here from chat, Trell, or are you about ready to wrap this thing up?
I think we're pretty good to wrap it up. We covered a lot.
All right.
There's going to be a lot of content next week.
Yeah, next week we'll have a ton to talk about for sure. Thanks everybody for watching. This has been episode 9 of the Titanforge podcast. We'll be back next week with Tettles and Trell, hopefully, back in our regular setup for episode 10. So thanks so much for the support so far. It's been a really fun show to make. And goodbye.
Thanks, guys.